Welcome to this course on C programming with puzzles from in 28 minutes. Let's start with a question. How do you want to learn to drive? Do you want to sit at home, read about it, and watch somebody drive? Will it really work? I'm sure it wouldn't. Programming is very similar. We have created this course with a lot of hands-on examples, and what's more, we use more than 100 puzzles to illustrate advanced concepts. In this video, let's look at loops with a lot of examples and puzzles. Now that we looked at the basics of the array, let's focus on loops. In this particular section, we will look at how you can use a for loop, a while loop, and a do while loop to loop through the values and print the values of this particular array. So that's the focus of this particular section. What we want to do is we will want to loop around this particular array and print all the values which are present in this particular array. How do we do that? Let's start with the for loop. The syntax of for loop looks complex, but it's actually quite simple. I'll for now put everything on separate lines just to make everything very, very clear. Usually we don't put these on separate lines, we have it on single lines. What we have in a for loop is the first statement. We typically in a for loop you would have three statements. You would have statement 1, statement 2, and statement 3 in here. The first part of the for loop is called initialization. The second part is called the condition or the check that you want to do. The third part is called the increment part. Until now, we have seen how assignment operator is used. I is equal to I plus 1 would kind of take the value of I plus 1. So I is equal to I plus 1, what happens? I plus 1 gets calculated and stored into I. So if I have a value of 5, I is equal to I plus 1. After this statement, I will have a value of 6 because 5 plus 1 is 6. 6 will be stored back into I. There is a shortcut for this particular thing, which is I plus plus would do something very similar. Minor difference is there, but effectively after the execution of this statement, the value of I would be incremented. Whether you do plus plus I or I plus plus, the value of I after the statement would remain incremented. There is a little bit of difference between plus plus I and I plus plus, which we'll talk about in subsequent sections. But for now, you can kind of think I plus plus is very similar to I is equal to I plus 1. It's an increment. What I do in a for is I can say int I is equal to 0. So that's the initialization, right? We want to put it down. So int I is equal to 0. Where do we want to start from? We want to start from 0 and we want to go up to 3. So in our loop, we would want to start with 0, first print 0th element, then print first element, then print the element at index 1, that's second element, then print the element at index 2, that's the third element, and then print the last element, which is at index 3. So where do we want to start from? I is equal to 0. So we want to start from I is equal to 0. Where do we want to go up to? We know that course length is 4. Right? So course length is 4. So I want to not print 100 elements, right? I just want to print 4 elements. The 4 elements, if you look at this, is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so I want to print until I has a value of 3. When I has a value of 3, it's okay. But when I has a value of 4, I would want to stop printing. And that's the condition check. So I'll say I less than course length. So while I is less than 4, I is 0, less than 4, good. I is 1, less than 4, good, go ahead and print. I is 2, less than 4, go ahead and print. I is 3, okay, still fine, go ahead and print. I is 4, nope, we don't have such element. So this is the right condition for that. So when I is 4, then this condition will be false. So in that kind of situation, we would go out of the loop. That's perfect. The next thing is we want initially I to be 0, next I to be 1, next I to be 2, next I to be 3. How do we achieve that? By using I is equal to I plus 1, or the short form for it is I plus 1. I want to print the value of I. I want to print percentage d, comma. What is the value that I want to print? I want to print scores, and I would want to print the value inside. I want to print scores of I. Let's run this program for you. elements of the array printed in here. What we did in here is basically we created a variable called I. This I which we are using in here is called loop variable. I would want to use the I from 0 to 3. So I would want to run this statement once with scores of 0, next with scores of 1, next with scores of 3, next with scores of 2, and then scores of 3. And that's all. So that's basically what I would want to start with is I is equal to 0. The initialization. The initialization is done only once in a for loop. When this loop starts, this initialization statement gets executed. Next is the condition. Condition is basically, it says when the loop would end. If this condition is satisfied, then it keeps running. As long as this condition is satisfied, it keeps moving around the loop. So it will continue doing the loop. And this is the increment which is done after the execution of the loop. So once it prints scores of 0. So what would happen? I would have initially first when this for loop is first time executed, I has a value of 0. So the condition is checked. I less than scores length which is 4. So 0 is less than 4? Yes, it is. So let's go ahead and say scores of 0 and 106 will be printed. Next, again it goes to the for loop, but now the initialization will not happen. Initialization will only happen once. So now I has a value. What is the value of I that we had earlier? I had a value of 0. What would happen is the second time it comes to the for loop, the initialization does not happen, but what happens is the increment. I instead of 0 becomes 1. Then the condition check happens. I is less than scores length. Is that right? Scores length is 4. 1 is less than 4. Yes, it's still true. So it prints scores of I, which is scores of 1, which is 15. So it prints this out. And then again it goes in, and this is the third time. So again increment would happen, not the initialization. Initialization would only happen the first time. All the subsequent times increments would happen. So I is 1, I becomes 2. Scores of 2 is printed, which is 145. Then again it goes in, does the increment, I becomes 3, goes into the body of the loop. Scores of 3 is 23, it prints 23, goes in, again does the increment, I becomes 4. 4 is less than scores length. 4 is less than 4, that's not true. So it goes out of the loop and starts running if there is anything at line 23 or 24 or 25. That's how a for loop works. So this is a very simple example of a for loop. We looked at how to write the loop using a for loop. Great thing about the for loop is, if I increment, let's add so many values to the array. All that I need to do now is I can say scores length is equal to how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I put 7, and it would print 7 values. So it becomes very easy to change your program. It directly prints 7 values to the output. So with arrays, if you have multiple values, processing becomes very easy. I don't really have to do copy paste the same code over again, do the same operation again and again. Now let's move to another loop which is called a while loop. What I'll do now is I'll use a while loop. The syntax of while loop is very simple. While condition keep executing. Like a for loop, a while does not have an initialization or an increment. All that it has is this condition. So I'll copy the condition over here. Condition is the same. So while this condition is true. So while this condition is true, I have to do the initialization. Right? Where do we do the initialization in a while? We have to do the initialization before. Initialization should be happening before the while, and now I want to do the increment as well. Right? I mean, without the increment, it will not work. Where do I do the increment? The increment is done inside the while at the end of the while. When I take a for, this is the easiest way you can convert it into a while loop. And now I'll take the body of the for loop and I will put it in the while loop. There you see how the kind of copied over all the code in a for loop and kind of executed it in a while loop. That's it. if I run this program now, you'll be able to successfully have your first while loop running down here. That's, you can see that everything is printed. This is a very, very simple while loop. Now, you will have a question, right? I mean, I can do the same thing with a for loop and a while loop. Why should I use a while loop and when should I use a for loop? That's kind of the basic question, right? Okay. Before that, let's reiterate the syntax of while. The syntax of while is very simple. While condition, open brace, close brace. That's it. And what would happen when we execute this is I is initialized to 0. So while I less than scores length, so I is 0, scores length is 7. So that's good. So it prints the value of I is 0, right? When it starts off, when it comes here for the first time, I will have a value of 0. So scores of 0 is printed, 15. Next, I plus plus happens, I becomes 1. 1 is less than scores of length, yes, it is. 1 is less than 7. So it prints the first element. And so on, second, third, fourth, fifth. And when I become 6, it prints score of 6, which is the last element in the array, which is the seventh element in the array. And I plus plus, I becomes 7. I is less than scores length, 7 is less than scores length. No, 7 is not less than 7. 7 is equal to 7 but not less than 7. So that condition breaks and the code comes out of the while loop. And if there was some code in line 16, 17, that code would have been executed. This is how a while loop runs. Now, when to use a while loop? The full situation we are talking about right now, in this kind of situation, it's easier, it's better to use a for loop, because rather than have this kind of a complex thing, I can do the same thing in for loop in a simple way. The way we would usually format things would be I is equal to 0, I less than scores length, I plus, and now within the braces, I can write in these kind of situations where I know how many times I would need to run ahead of time. Ahead of time, I know I have to run it 7 times or 6 times or 5 times, whatever it is. In those kind of situations, it's better to go for a for loop rather than going for a while loop. But there would be situations where I don't know how many times I have to execute something. So let's say I'm reading something from a file, and as long as I have records in the file, I want to keep reading it. In those kind of situations, I don't know how many times I have to read ahead of time. In that kind of situation, we say while there are more records, keep trying to read. In those kind of situations, it's better to use a while. Now, let's see how to do the same thing with a do while loop. Actually, do while is very, very similar to a while, except that the condition check, instead of being done at the start, is done at the end. I'm moving the while to the end, and I'll say do while. I'll put a semicolon at the end of the whole. I'll do a run as local application. Aha, there you go. The entire array is printed. The do while and the while, the only difference between them is the fact that in a do while, condition check is at the end of the execution of the loop. Whereas in a while, condition check is at the start of the loop. What difference does it make? The most prominent difference that this makes is the fact that a do while would be executed at least once. Because I don't do a condition check here, this would be executed at least once. Let's consider a situation when there are no elements in the array and I'm using a do while. If I has a value of 0, what would happen? It would execute the loop at least once. Oh, actually, I have made a mistake. So scores length now is 0, right? There are no elements in the array. I run this now. What would happen? It prints one element to the output, because what happens is it comes to do, it tries and prints the value at 0. It, even before doing a condition check, it prints the value, and only then the condition check happens. So in case of a 0 element array, the program will not work. But whereas if I was using a while loop, I'm changing this and I'm putting a while loop, the condition check is at the start. So in this kind of situation, you would see that there is nothing in the output, because the condition check happens first and it sees that there are no elements in the array, so nothing is printed. You would go for a do while loop when you would want code inside to be executed at least once. If we use a while, there's a chance that if the conditions don't meet, then that particular code inside the while will not be executed even once. So when you want to be certain that it's executed at least once, in those kind of situations, you go for a do while. Actually, we are going to discuss loops in great detail further down in the programs that we would write. And I hope you would be able to get a very good understanding of loops in those sections as well. Now, let's start with a simple program for a for loop. I want to find the sum of first n numbers. Quite simple, isn't it? What should we do? Basically, if I pass a number 5, then I would want the function to return sum of numbers from 1 to 5. So it should return 1 plus 2 plus so on up to 5. So it should place 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So that's basically the thing which I would want to sum it up and return it back. If you are interested, go and try what that value should be. It's actually 15. So let's write a program to find the sum of first n numbers. I've a basic skeleton here already. So it returns an integer back. It accepts an integer parameter. Calculates sum up to is the name I gave it, or you could have called it sum of first n numbers, something of that kind. Calculate sum up to 5. Calculate sum up to 10, and I'm printing those values out. So what should be the logic in here? So what should the for loop? So basically, I would want to find from 1 to n. So I have to run the loop from 1 to n, and I would want to keep adding them up. Whenever we want to keep adding the number, so I want to first run the loop from 1 to n and then add. So 1 to n, it basically means, let's say I'm running it from 1 to 5. So I should run it for 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And then I should keep adding these things to somewhere. What is that something? So I add 1 to 2, I want to store the result temporarily. Then I would add 3, then I would add 4, then I would add 5. So I need a temporary variable to hold the result. And that temporary variable, I would call it as result, and I'll give it an initial value of 0. If I don't give an initial value, think what would happen. Once I have a loop, then I can do result is equal to result plus the index. And I can run the loop from 1 to n. That's kind of the logic that we would want to write. So let's go ahead and write it. It's not really complex. So for initialization, int I is equal to, usually we initialize I to 0 in most of the programs, but here we want to run it from 1 to n. I is equal to 1, I less than n. Is this right? Less than n? No, this is not right, because if n is 5, I would want to run the loop from 1 to 5. So it should be I less than equal to n, I plus. Now I have a loop I running from 1 up to n. So for I is equal to 1 to n, I have a loop running. That's very good. Now I would want to keep adding each value of I to the result. So result is equal to result plus I. And then I could return the result back. Return result. So how would this program work? First, let's say I pass in a value 3. I would be 1. Result plus 1, the result will be 0, result plus 1, so result will have a value 1. Then I becomes 2, so to the already existing value in result, 2 would be added. And then I would be 3, and to the already existing value in result, 3 would be added. And this is how the sum of first n numbers is calculated. Let's now run this program and see what happens. There you go. Sum up to 5, 15, as we already discussed. Sum up to 10, 55. Is it right? There's a formula n into n plus 1 by 2, which you can use to calculate. Or you might take the hard approach, add numbers up to 10 and check whether it's 55. Okay, so the concept which we learned in here is kind of using a temporary variable. And we are running a loop, and to the temporary variable, we keep adding every index in the loop. So I is the index we are using. So we keep adding the index, and thereby we keep summing it up, and by the end, we find out what the sum of first n numbers is. That's how this program works. As an exercise, you can probably change this program to find the multiplication of the first n numbers. There would be a few unexpected results down there, but it would be great to figure them out. Good luck. We want to find the sum of first n even numbers and first sum of n odd numbers. I'll do the sum of even numbers and I will leave the odd numbers as an exercise. Right now, what we have in here is a program to find the sum of first n numbers. I would want to modify this to find out the sum of first n even numbers. Calculate sum even numbers and just rename the function. The program as it is returns the sum of first n numbers. I want to make it return the sum of first n odd numbers. Is there a easy modification that we can do? Actually, we can achieve the result in two ways. One is changing the loop to run from, think about it, right now the loop runs from 1 to n. If I want to find the sum of first n even numbers, what do I want to run it from? Think about it. The other thing is I'm adding 1 to n in here. Is there a way I can make it so that I can add 2 into 1 to 2 into n? How can I do that? Think about it again. Okay, let's implement the easiest solution first. So this is calculating sum up to n numbers. To make it, I want to calculate sum up to the n even numbers. I can do something of this kind. The first even number is when I is 1, it will have 2. When I is 2, this will be 4. When I is 3, this will be 6. So on. So that's the first way. So now this program, what it does is first, when I is 1, it would have 2. And then when I is 2, it adds in 4. When I is 3, it adds in 3 into 2, which is 6. And so on up to n. And thereby it calculates the sum of first n even numbers. Let's run this program and see if it works fine. There you go. It's printing the right values. 30 and 110 are right. You can go ahead and calculate them and see if it's proper or not. So that's one way of doing the sum of first n even numbers. Now, I want to change the loop. I don't want to run the loop from I is equal to 1 to n I plus plus, but I want to run the loop from 2 to 2 into n. So I want to run the loop from, let's say n is 5. So I want to run the loop from 2 to 10, but I only want to use values which are even. So I want to run the loop having values 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. How do I do that? So I want I to be 2 first, 4 next, 6 next. How do I do that? So I can start with 2, and while I less than equal to, if you look at each one of these, 2, 4, 6, 8, they have a difference of 2. So it's not sufficient if I do I plus plus. Actually, I should do I plus 2. If I do I less than equal to n, and if n is 5, then the loop stops here, because 6 is greater than 5, the loop would terminate. So I should actually do less than equal to n star 2. And now it would run the loop from, so it will be 2 plus 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then it would print the sum of first 5 even numbers. Aha, let's check that out. Okay, there you go. Same result as previous, different logic. I would really recommend you to look at both the things that we discussed during this particular section. Let's now discuss about a program to print divisors of a number. What do I mean? Let's say take 12. The divisors of 12 are 1, you would exclude it because 1 kind of divides everything. So 2 divides 12 without leaving a remainder. 12 is divisible by 2 without leaving a remainder. The other divisors are 3. I can think of 4, 6. These are the divisors of 12. So let's write a program to print all of them. How we do that? So obviously, I have to run a loop from 1 to n, and I would want to check if it's divisible by 12. If 12 the number n is divisible by that particular index, how do I find out if it's 0? So if number mod index is equal to 0, then it's fine. So then I can print f percentage d comma that particular number. I guess this is kind of the logic that we would want to write. Let's try and write that particular program down. For loop to run from 1 to n, I don't really want to run it from 1 to n. That's one thing. I want to run it from 2 to n minus 1 because 1 and n would always divide the number. So if I pass in a 12, then 12 will always be divisible by 1 and 12 will be divisible by 12. I mean, I don't really need that information. So I would want to really run it from 2 to n minus 1. So I'll start with int I is equal to 2. I want to check every number up to n, so not including n. So I put I less than n. I want to check every number 2, 3, 4, 5. So I just I plus plus. And if n mod index here I'm using is the I. If number when divided by I would be 2 first, 3, 4, 5, 6, and minus 1. So if it's 0, then it would print the index value, which is I. And I think that's it. Okay, there you go. That's a very quick program. Print the divisors of a particular number.
In this video, let's look at the different questions related to the for loop. The first question is, what are the different parts of the for loop? On your screen is an example for loop where you see int I is equal to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. This is kind of a typical for loop. No, nothing complicated in here. The first part of the for loop, the first one before the semicolon, is called initialization. The second part is called the condition check. So the third part is called the increment. So the last third part is called the increment. The initialization is executed only for the first time in a for loop. So when this for loop is executing for the first time, that's when the initialization gets executed. The condition check gets executed every time. So if I give a value 10 here, I is equal to 10, then this for loop will not get executed even once. Let's check that up. So it's not printing anything from the for loop. So the initialization happens, then the condition check, and the condition check sees that I is not less than 10. It's equal to 10. So it's not less than 10. So the condition check fails. So it just jumps out of the for loop. So let's go back to 0. So this is initialization. Condition check happens every time. And only if this condition is satisfied, it would go into the for loop. And the next thing which happens is an increment. So the increment is done every time except for the first time. So whatever is in here will not be executed when the initialization happens. When the initialization happens, the increment will not happen. When increment happens, the initialization will not happen. So in a for loop, for each loop, either the initialization or an increment would happen. First time, initialization happens. Every other time, increment would happen. So the way for loop would be executed is first time initialization, condition check. Condition check is true. Body of the loop is executed. Then it comes an increment. Then checks the condition. Body of the thing, increment, condition check, and body. That's basically how the for loop executes. And when I run this program, you'd see that I would be printed from 0 to 9 because up to 10 is what we asked it to print. The other thing is, can I have commas in each of these conditions? So actually, yes. So in addition to I can probably do j minus minus. So let's say I want to print increment I and also decrement j at the same time. I can do that in the increment part of the if condition. So here, in addition to that, probably I can say I, and I can also print the value of j in here, passing j as a parameter, and let's add a slash in so that these get printed on different lines. Let's see what happens now. So you'd see that I gets incremented and j gets decremented at the same time. So the comma operator can be used in the for loop syntax directly in the increment part of it. Actually, you can even use it in any other part of the if condition. So j greater than 0 or something of that kind. It's allowed to use a condition in here. And if you really want, you don't even need to declare j here. So if j is used only inside the loop, you can even declare j here. J is equal to 10. And you would see that the program would run without a problem. The only thing is, if you declare a variable in here, then the variable is not available outside the for loop. So if I do something of this kind, %d, comma I, comma j, what would happen? Obviously, it gives a compilation error because the variables are only available in the for block. So this is a block, and inside the block is where the variables are available. These are not available outside the block. Next, we will consider two different questions. What is the continue statement for, and what is the break statement for? In here, I've written a simple function which uses the break statement. What I want to do in this function is sum up to first 0. So I would want to send it a set of an array of integers, array of numbers. I would want to do the sum only up to the first 0. So once I see a 0, I would want to get out of this and return the value. So thing is, if I pass in a value, set of values, let's say 1, 2, 3, 0, 5, 6. So it's 1, no problem, and 2, no problem, and 3, no problem, and 0, n. So I would want the sum of 1 plus 2 plus 3 and get back. Similarly, if let's say the 0 didn't happen here and somewhere here, then I would want the sum of only the numbers up to the 0. And I would want to get out of the loop once I see a 0. This is the kind of scenarios where I use a break statement. So what I'm doing is, if numbers of I is equal to 0, if number of I is 0, then break. What it does is, as soon as it sees a 0, it breaks out of the for loop. So the next statement of the for loop is executed. So after 7, if a break is executed, if any of the numbers matches 0, then the break is executed and the execution would switch to the next statement after the for loop, which is return sum. So this statement will be executed next and the sum will be returned. So if I pass in these values to this particular thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, the value which would be printed is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, because the fifth number is 0, it would not be included. It would print sum is 10. Let's make the first number 0, then it will return a value 0, because as soon as it's 0, it breaks out, it returns the sum and gets out of the thing. So let's make this one 0. So it would return 1 plus 2 only. So it should return 3. Okay, that's what you see. So that's basically the use of a break statement. A break statement in a for loop or a while loop or a do while would break out of the loop and it would start executing the next statement after the loop. That's what the break statement is for. Next question is, what is the continuous statement? Let's look at an example. In this example, what I want to do is I would want only the sum of the positive values. So 1, 2, 3, minus 1, 2, 3, minus 6. If I get an array of this kind, I would want to ignore the negative values. So I would want to ignore these negative values and I would want the sum of 1, 2, 3, 6 and plus 2 is 8 plus 3 is 11. So I would want to return 11 back. If it's something of this kind, minus 1, minus 2 and 4. I would want to ignore minus 1, ignore minus 2 and return 4 back. 4 is the only one. So if there was another element 8, then I would want to return 4 plus 8, 12 back. So I would want to ignore all the negative numbers in the array and I would want to sum up only the positive numbers. That's what this function is doing. The thing which allows us to do that is a continue. When there is a continue in a loop, so in a a for loop, when there's a continue, what happens is all the statements until the end of the for loop get skipped. So if the continue is executed here, what happens is this statement is skipped and it would return and start executing the increment and the condition check. So when I execute a continue, what it does is it skips the rest of the statements inside that loop and continues with the next increment. So when if I is equal to, let's say I is equal to 5 and it's executing it, gets a continue. So it skips executing this for I is equal to 5 and goes and increments I becomes 6 and so on. So a continue is used to skip the rest of the statements in a loop and start executing for the next iteration. So to summarize, continue will skip one iteration of a loop. Break would completely break out of the loop. Continue will only skip one iteration. So it would skip all the statements after the continue for one iteration. That's the major difference between break and continue. This is kind of the favorite question of interviewers. What is the difference between break and continue? It's easier to explain with an example, and if you want to say a statement, then something of this kind would suffice. Continue would skip one iteration. All the statements, all further statements are skipped for one iteration, and break would completely break out of the loop. None of the iterations of the loop are executed after a break statement. The next question is this a valid statement? For semicolon, semicolon, open bracket, and a semicolon. Yes, this is a valid statement, except that this would result in an infinite loop. This is called an infinite loop. This is very similar to saying while 1 or minus 1, whichever one you would prefer, and an empty statement. So this loop keeps running forever because this is an empty statement. This keeps executing, and if I run the program now, it would go into an infinite loop. It keeps executing forever and ever and ever. This is also, you can write a thing with a do while as well. So do while 1, this would keep executing ever. Usually in this kind of scenarios, do while 1 is used when, let's say I'm reading something from a file, like read file, something I would read from a file, and let's say it returns a value, and I would check if value is equal to 0, then break. I mean, this is the kind of situations when this infinite loop makes sense. So you keep reading until you get a value 0. Once you get a value 0, you break out of the thing. The same thing can be also performed while loop. I can do while 1, value is equal to read file. If value is equal to 0, break. That's possible. And yeah, this is an example of an infinite loop while 1. But there are some uses for this infinite loop. I mean, when I have a break inside this kind of becomes a finite loop and no more an infinite loop, because when this condition gets satisfied, when you get a value of 0 from this, it breaks out. If you don't get a value, then process the value and do something about it. You can process it and do something about it. So those are the different things related to the loops in C language.
If you are preparing for C interview, we have a complete C interview guide available. And if you are preparing for a C aptitude test, then we have C puzzles for interview as well. You can find the links to this in the description of this video. If you love this video, then we are sure you'd love our other courses as well. We have more than 10 GitHub repositories with examples on C, Spring, Java, basic web application, Maven, Mockito. Whenever you are in need for examples, you can look these up. We have a number of courses created on ChalkStreet as well. You can search for in 28 minutes in chalkstreet.com, and there you go. Right now we have 3 different courses in here. I'm sure there will be a lot more courses and we have a lot of courses on C, Java, Spring, and a lot of Java related frameworks and web applications on Udemy as well. You might like some of the most watched videos on our YouTube channel. We have courses on design patterns, web applications, Maven, Spring, Eclipse, and web applications as well. Good luck with your learning. All the best for you. Until next time.